You are not broken. You are patterned by survival, and survival shaped you into someone who feels everything. If you're an empath who feels like you don't belong anywhere, it's not because you're too sensitive, too intense, or too much. It's because long before you had language for it, your nervous system learned a powerful lesson: belonging was conditional. Love had rules. Safety depended on reading the room, anticipating moods, becoming what others needed you to be. Empaths who feel out of place usually went through this. They grew up in environments where emotional attunement was necessary for survival, where silence meant danger, where harmony mattered more than honesty, where being yourself risked disconnection. So you learned to disappear, quietly, skillfully, into usefulness. You didn't become sensitive by choice. You became sensitive because you had to. You learned to scan faces, tones, energies. You learned to carry what others couldn't hold. You learned to feel deeply because not feeling wasn't an option. And somewhere along the way, you mistook adaptation for identity. That's why crowds can feel lonely. That's why home feels hard to define. That's why you can belong everywhere and still feel rooted nowhere. But here's the truth that was never given to you. Your empathy is not the wound. It's the intelligence that emerged from it. The pain came from learning that your needs were inconvenient, that your feelings were too much, that love required self-abandonment. So you became exceptional at meeting others, while leaving yourself behind. And when you abandon yourself long enough, even belonging feels foreign. Healing doesn't mean becoming less sensitive. Healing means becoming self-connected. It means unlearning the reflex to disappear. It means letting discomfort exist without fixing it. It means choosing authenticity over attachment, even when it's terrifying. Belonging doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from showing up as you are and staying. Staying in your body, staying with your truth, staying when your old patterns beg you to perform. Your sensitivity was not something you chose because it was beautiful or poetic or spiritually enlightened. It emerged because your system needed it. At some point early on, your body and mind learned that paying close attention was necessary. You learned to notice shifts in tone, subtle changes in mood, the emotional weather in a room. Not because you were curious, but because not noticing had consequences. Sensitivity became a form of vigilance. It became how you stayed safe, how you maintained connection, how you avoided conflict, abandonment, or emotional withdrawal. When a child grows up in an environment where emotions are unpredictable, unspoken, or overwhelming, the nervous system adapts. It learns to widen its lens. It learns to feel before thinking. It learns to read between the lines. What people later call being too sensitive was once an intelligent response to a world that required early emotional maturity. You became attuned because attunement was demanded of you. Your empathy was trained, not gifted by accident. This kind of sensitivity often develops when a child has to sense what others need before anyone asks. When care, approval, or peace depends on being emotionally available. When expressing your own feelings feels risky or burdensome. So instead of asking for support, you become the support. Instead of being held, you hold. Instead of being guided, you guide yourself. Over time, this shapes an identity: the one who understands, the one who feels deeply, the one who can handle more than others. But survival skills don't disappear when danger passes, they linger. What once helped you navigate chaos can later feel like a flaw in calmer environments. You may feel overstimulated, emotionally exhausted, or overwhelmed by things others brush off. You may absorb emotions that don't belong to you. You may struggle to tell where you end and others begin. And because this sensitivity develops so early, it feels like who you are rather than what you learned. Society often misunderstands this. It praises toughness and minimizes emotional awareness, especially when it doesn't come with clear boundaries. So you're told to harden, to detach, to stop caring so much. But that advice misses the truth. The problem was never that you feel deeply. The problem is that you had to feel deeply before you had the choice to, before you had protection, before you had the language to name what was happening inside you. When sensitivity is rooted in survival, it's always scanning for threat, even in safe moments. It doesn't rest easily. It doesn't trust stillness. It mistakes calm for danger because calm once preceded rupture. This is why relaxing can feel uncomfortable, why silence can feel loud, why joy sometimes comes with guilt or anxiety. Your system learned that vigilance equals safety, so letting go feels unfamiliar. Understanding this changes the story. You're not overly emotional. You're highly adapted. Your nervous system learned to do exactly what it needed to do at the time. And just as it learned these patterns, it can slowly learn new ones. Sensitivity doesn't need to be erased, it needs to be unburdened. It needs to be separated from constant alertness. It needs permission to exist without the job of keeping everyone else okay. When you stop judging your sensitivity and start understanding its origins, something shifts. Self-compassion grows. You begin to see that what once kept you alive does not need to run your life forever. The same awareness that once protected you can, with safety and support, become discernment rather than hypervigilance, empathy rather than self-sacrifice, presence rather than exhaustion. Feeling like you don't belong is often misunderstood as a personal weakness, as if something essential is missing inside you. But more often, it is the echo of a long-standing pattern of self-abandonment that began early and repeated quietly over time. When connection felt uncertain, you learned to secure it by adjusting yourself. You learned to read what was acceptable and what was not, which parts of you were welcomed and which needed to be hidden. Belonging became something you earned, not something you were given. In environments where love or approval depended on compliance, harmony, or emotional availability, authenticity felt dangerous. You sensed that being fully yourself might disrupt the balance, invite rejection, or overwhelm the people you depended on. So you adapted. You softened your edges, edited your reactions, silenced your needs. Each small adjustment seemed harmless, even necessary. But over years, these moments added up to a quiet disconnection from yourself. Self-abandonment rarely looks dramatic. It looks like saying yes when your body says no. It looks like being easygoing when you're actually hurt. It looks like explaining yourself endlessly so others won't misunderstand you. It looks like prioritizing other people's comfort over your own truth. These habits often form before you have the awareness to question them, becoming automatic responses rather than conscious choices. When you consistently leave yourself behind in relationships, belonging starts to feel hollow. You may be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. You may fit into many spaces but feel rooted in none. This isn't because you are incapable of connection. It's because the version of you that shows up has been carefully filtered to maintain safety. And no matter how much acceptance that version receives, it never fully satisfies the deeper need to be known. Over time, this pattern creates confusion. You might blame yourself for feeling out of place, assuming you're too different or too complicated. You might believe that once you find the right group, the right relationship, or the right environment, the sense of belonging will finally arrive. But external belonging cannot heal an internal absence. No space can feel like home if you are not allowed to live fully inside yourself. This self-abandonment often began as a way to preserve attachment. As a child, staying connected mattered more than staying authentic. Losing connection felt like losing safety, so your system made a trade-off. It chose connection at the cost of self-expression. That choice was wise at the time. It helped you survive emotionally. But as an adult, the cost becomes clearer. You may struggle to identify what you truly want, feel, or need because you spent so long prioritizing others. The feeling of not belonging is not a signal that you need to change who you are. It is a signal that parts of you have been excluded for a long time. It arises when your inner world is fragmented, when certain emotions, desires, or truths are kept out of awareness because they once threatened connection. Belonging cannot occur where wholeness is not permitted. Reclaiming belonging requires noticing the moments you instinctively leave yourself. The subtle tightening in your chest when you're about to speak but choose silence. The automatic smile when you feel disappointment. The urge to smooth things over instead of naming discomfort. These are not failures of character. They are learned responses that once kept you safe. As you begin to recognize these patterns, discomfort may increase before it decreases. Honoring yourself can feel risky when self-erasure has been the norm. You may fear conflict, rejection, or being misunderstood. But each time you stay present with your own experience instead of abandoning it, you restore a piece of internal trust. Belonging grows from this internal alignment, from the gradual willingness to remain connected to yourself even when it feels unfamiliar or unsafe. Choosing authenticity over approval sounds simple on the surface, but for many people it represents one of the most threatening shifts imaginable. Approval once meant safety. It meant connection, protection, being seen as acceptable enough to stay close. Authenticity, by contrast, may have once led to tension, withdrawal, or emotional consequences. So the body learned early that being real came at a cost. Even as an adult, that memory lives not as a thought, but as a sensation, a tightening, a warning that says, don't risk it. When approval has been your currency, you learn to measure yourself through others' reactions. You track facial expressions, tone changes, pauses in conversation. You learn to anticipate disappointment before it's spoken. Over time, this creates an external reference point for worth. You don't ask, is this true for me? You ask, will this be accepted? The question becomes automatic, bypassing your inner voice entirely. Authenticity disrupts this pattern because it shifts authority inward. It asks you to trust your own perceptions, needs, and limits even when they don't align with expectations. That can feel destabilizing. Without approval as your guide, you may feel unmoored, unsure, exposed. The familiar structure of pleasing others disappears, and in its place is uncertainty. For someone conditioned to equate approval with survival, uncertainty can feel like danger. This is why authenticity often begins with discomfort rather than relief. Speaking honestly might bring guilt. Setting boundaries might bring anxiety. Saying no might feel like betrayal. These reactions don't mean you're doing something wrong. They mean you're interrupting a long-standing pattern that once kept you connected. The nervous system protests because it doesn't yet recognize that you are no longer dependent in the same way. Approval seeking is not vanity or weakness. It is a strategy. It developed because relationships required it. But strategies that work in one context can limit growth in another. As you mature, the need shifts. You are no longer trying to secure attachment at any cost. You are trying to live in alignment. And alignment demands truth, even when truth risks misunderstanding. Choosing authenticity doesn't mean rejecting connection. It means redefining it. Instead of connection based on performance, it becomes connection based on presence. Instead of being liked, it becomes being known. This shift often reveals which relationships are rooted in mutual respect, and which rely on your self-silencing. That discovery can be painful. You may realize that some connections were sustained primarily by your flexibility, your compliance, your emotional labor. The fear of losing approval often masks a deeper fear of being alone with yourself. When you stop adjusting, you are left with your own feelings, preferences, and contradictions. You may discover anger you were never allowed to express, sadness you had to minimize, desires you learned to suppress. Authenticity brings these parts into awareness, not to overwhelm you, but to integrate what was split off for the sake of acceptance. This process is gradual. It happens in small moments rather than grand declarations. It happens when you pause before responding and check in with your body. When you allow yourself to disappoint someone without rushing to repair it. When you name a need without apologizing for it. Each choice reinforces the message that your inner experience matters, that you are allowed to take up space without earning it. As authenticity strengthens, approval loses its grip, not because you stop caring about others, but because your sense of self becomes less negotiable. You begin to feel the difference between connection that requires self-betrayal and connection that allows you to remain intact. The former may feel familiar, but the latter feels grounding, even if it's quieter or less frequent. Healing in this way is not about becoming fearless. It's about becoming willing to tolerate the discomfort of being seen, willing to sit with the anxiety of not knowing how others will respond, willing to trust that losing approval is survivable, while losing yourself is not.